Malawi, a landlocked country in Southeast Africa, has its majority of population, 85.5%, dependent on natural resources for their livelihoods, as rain-fed agriculture is practiced by more than 90% of its farmers. This has put a lot of pressure on natural resources. As the country's population tripled over the past 40 years, consequently, pressure for natural resources and land has increased and continues to increase. Furthermore, populations tend to migrate into areas which have highly productive ecosystems, such as the Lake Shira Basin, where there has been a steady flow of migrants seeking better livelihoods. Climate change exacerbates the strain on natural resources. The National Adaptation Plans of Action for Malawi documented both direct and indirect impacts of climate change across many sectors, including agriculture, water, human health, energy, fisheries, wildlife, forestry, and gender. Climate change disproportionately affects women as it decreases the availability of natural resources that women are responsible for collecting, including food, firewood, and water for their households. Consumption due to population growth in poor societies in Malawi will emit insignificant amounts of greenhouse gases. However, deforestation and land use change by these societies can contribute towards greenhouse gases emissions. Furthermore, 27% of women in Malawi have expressed an unmet need for national family planning. If these women had access to family planning, they would be able to have fewer children, the ability to space birth, and as a result, be able to better adapt to climate change impacts.
Malawi's population has trebled over the past 40 years, and this has put tremendous pressure on natural resources in the country, as majority of its rural populations depend on natural resources for their livelihoods. In addition to this is the challenge of climate change, which affects almost all sectors, and sensitive areas such as the ecosystem of Lake Chilwa Basin is highly vulnerable because there is the impacts of climate change as well as the pressure of population as more people migrate into these highly productive ecosystems such as the Lake Chilwa. In 2012, Leadership for Environment and Development, Southern and Eastern Africa, conducted a study funded by Population Action International in the Lake Chilwa Basin. We interviewed 100 households and we conducted a number of focus group discussions to understand the linkages between population, reproductive health, gender, and climate change. And indeed, the communities understood these linkages. They realized that population is putting a lot of pressure on availability of land. It's putting pressure on forest resources, fisheries, and farming as well. And women are the ones who are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change, as they are the ones responsible for sourcing firewood, water, and food for the families. In addition to these responsibilities, they are further burdened by giving birth to children and not having enough access to reproductive health services as well as family planning. So we published this report in this book, and we have some key messages that have come out where we talked about the importance of empowerment of women and improving access to family planning so that they can decide how many children they want and the spacing of those children. This will help them to adapt better to climate change. After this study, we did a stakeholder mapping where we looked at different organizations and institutions in Malawi that were looking at population issues or climate change issues separately, and where we could come in and bring an integrated approach. So Ministry of Youth had produced a training manual on youth's issues affecting youth. And we realized that this is an opportunity where we can integrate population and climate change issues into the manual. And that is why we are here today in Salima with stakeholders from NGO, academia, and government to sit together to revise this manual on issues affecting youth and to integrate chapters on population and climate change.
Present at the workshop organized by LEAD were different stakeholders, such as the Ministry of Youth, which was represented by Wilfred Lichapa, the Chief Youth Officer, who starts by explaining the objective of the workshop.
The objective of this workshop is to, one, finalize a manual, which we call Manual on Issues Affecting the Youth, and at the same time to integrate climate change and population issues in that manual, because the manual is in the draft stage and it needed to be finalized. But in the process of finalizing the manual, it was felt that issues of climate change and population, which are very critical, very important to the nation, and including young people, needed to be integrated in the manual, so that all the issues, including issues of population, issues of climate change, need to be made known to the youth.
Meshek Muntali, who is the Chief Lecturer and Teacher Trainer at Domasi College of Education, highlights the connection between education, the youth, and climate change.
If you look at the demographic characteristics of this country, the majority are women, but besides that, we also have got a lot of our youth in the country. So if we're going to talk about issues of climate change, we cannot leave behind the power of the youth, who are actually a lot in this country. And we are talking of both in school and out of school youth. And therefore this workshop is very important, which has been organized by LEAD, that if we can engage the youth in the fight or in the interventions in climate change, then we're talking of a winning formula for issues of the climate change. But also with regard to education, when we talk of teacher training, when we talk of curriculum development, issues of climate change are part and parcel of what we are developing as a responsive curriculum, because a curriculum must reflect the needs of the country. And as at now, there is no nation that has not been affected by issues of climate change. And so as educators, we are also implementing issues of climate change in a number of curriculum, for example, in agriculture, in geography, in social and development studies, and so on and so forth. Now, that's an academic perspective, but we must also engage the youth in practical interventions that are going to mitigate issues of climate change. For example, how to combat issues of deforestation, how to reduce issues of charcoal making in this country, how to harvest water so that we can improve water harvesting capacity in our communities. So we must talk of practical issues that the youth must be engaged in, so that issues of climate change in this country are mitigated in a more positive manner. So education and the youth and climate change are very well connected in that context.
National Youth Council was represented at this workshop by its Executive Director, Obresh Bwana, who, according to him, believes that
the young people are the majority in this country. And if you're talking about climate change, they take the overall negative impact that climate change brings with it. So it is only fair that we look at the whole issue holistically and see how young people get affected by climate change and how they can get involved in mitigating the effects of climate change. They should be on both sides. Maybe how they contribute to the causes of climate change. For example, since most of them are unemployed, maybe they're involved in tree cutting and they're not planting trees. That's contributing to the climate change. And what are the impacts? We have got the floods, we have got the unreliable rainfall patterns, which is affecting our agricultural productivity. So they can be both contributors and again as victims of climate change.
Upon illustrating the linkages between population, reproductive health, gender and climate change, Hans Katengeza, who happens to be the Program Officer for Youth-Friendly Services at the Department of Reproductive Health in the Ministry of Health, had this to say.
This workshop we are holding today is very important because it has some direct impact over our young people, not only on sexual and reproductive health, but they should also be integrated and be knowledgeable enough on the issues about climate change. Because I think there's a lot that young people are supposed to know about the issues on sexual and reproductive health, as well as issues on climate change.
Head of Climate Change and Research Services in the Department of Climate Change and Meteorological Services, Frank Kosamu, who was present at the workshop, has this advice to the youth, much as issues of climate change are concerned.
As you know, that climate change is one of the key pillars of elements in the MGDS, so it's very important that the sectors, they need to take that issue and incorporate them into the operation plan and all other issues related to that. As you know, the youth forms almost over 50% of the population of Malawi, so they're a very critical group of people that need to be involved in the climate change management. So there in the manual we have included issues to do with the definition of climate change. They need to know what it is, how it is caused, and also how they can get involved, particularly in taking efforts to make sure that they are involved in the adaptation actions as well as mitigation, and also they need to know how they could cooperate with the development partners, the NGOs that they work in the communities, and the religious organizations, so that they all work together to make sure that we are able to manage this challenge of climate change.